Well, Kurt Vonnegut needs little introduction. As usual, I will try to at the same time expose as much as I can and be scant with specific details so readers may find for themselves what this is all about. Breakfast of Champions is the story of two characters and how their completely different lives intermingling even briefly end up in an explosive result in completely different ways. This is the story of Dwayne Hoover, a rich owner of a Pontiac dealership and several businesses due to real estate, and is also slowly been going insane after his wife committed suicide by drinking Drano. And this is also the story of Kilgore Trout, a jaded, miserable, reclusive author of several obscure science fiction stories published in porno magazines. But, by pure luck, he was invited to speak at an arts festival in the same city where Dwayne lives. And, as heralded right from the start in the book, somehow Kilgore will inspire Dwayne into going into a rampage. Normally, Kurt Vonnegut is what I describe as a raw author. He is scant with the details, but his focus is clearly to evoke raw emotions. Here, his method of inducing the viewer to contest and ponder is to basically reduce everything to its bare-bones concepts. He frequently points out how ludicrous racism is by simply describing what white people do whenever they deal with black people, or points out how some phrases are chosen by companies because they sound good, or the reasoning behind weird choices. For example, he doesn't explicitly tell the reader to feel neither pity or anger about how Dwayne Hoover was an awful human being for hating his son. He just writes that Dwayne Hoover was estranged from his son because of the latter's homosexuality. He also prefers to expose the interracial tensions and a relationship in the city by merely describing what people do or say about each other. It's a nearly minimalistic approach, except that it doesn't partake into the whole book and varies in depth. For example, Dwayne had a black servant named Lottie Davis. She cleaned his house every day. Then she cooked his supper for him and served it. Then she went home. She was descended from slaves. Lottie Davis and Dwayne didn't talk much, even though they liked each other a lot. Dwayne reserved most of his conversation for the dog. He would get down on the floor and roll around with Sparky, and he would say things like, "You and me, Sparky," and "How's my old buddy?" and so on. This evokes a mental image based on what the reader knows about the Americana lifestyle, and I'd say it's effective. Though details go up and down as the story goes, sometimes Kurt completely describes an art gallery or the effect of toxic waste upon the feet. Sometimes it's just the bare essentials, such as the aforementioned excerpt. The narrative structure is a bit convoluted, not because of the complexity of the themes or the fact that there are two main characters, but an interesting trend on Kurt to go off tangent constantly following specific trails of thought. For example, he may be talking about how Trout is taking a ride on a truck, and then start to focus only on the truck, hopping on the tangent of the company that made the truck, why the company chose a specific phrase, and then put a picture drawn by Kurt himself about the ongoing topic. There are several pictures that illustrate the topic going at hand. A picture is a means of transmitting and receiving visual information, usually something drawn on a canvas, using something that can leave a lasting going impression on said canvas. For example, a picture drawn by a pencil over a sheet of paper. A pencil is a piece of wood with a stick of graphite inside of it, and it looks like this. And sometimes the tangents just go on for so long that it's nearly impossible not to feel a bit lost or have your attention whittled down. Sometimes the tangents are relevant because they will be referenced later, and sometimes they don't. Overall, it's a deceivingly simple style used to deliver a highly convoluted set of themes and heavy ideas. Fitting, really. Considering the author, I genuinely don't know if this was on purpose, part of his rambling process, or both. But one thing that I can say is that dancing in the edge between artistic bad, with the ramblings, the tangents, and the plain bad, takes a lot of skill. I read the entire book and never felt as if the style was condescending or preachy, much on the contrary, and the style did well in hooking me up through all the convoluted back and forth. Speaking of the cohesion, I can surely say that there is a cohesion in this book. Scattered, perhaps a bit drunk or tits up drugged, but it is here. Basically, Breakfast of Champions already starts with a daunting style of following two protagonists and then flips it out, mixing something back and forth between future and past, and tangents about ideas. Basically, there are two plot threads: the life and path of Kilgore Trout as he goes into a small city to deliver a speech, and the day of Dwayne Hoover. The book already starts announcing what is going to happen after both these people meet, and as it narrates both the trip and the day, it goes back and forth to deliver details of how these severely damaged men came to be, and some of the repercussions of their actions. The trick is that it doesn't take much time, nor it details too much, merely using the snippets as bait to keep the reader hooked, almost like a preview of the next chapter in your favorite series episode ending. Do they still do that in the series nowadays? And since the vast majority of the threads are still interlinked and due to their simplistic nature, it's easy to remember the majority, not all, but the majority. Interestingly, I found that this book offers what's basically the opposite of immersion. You're not reading Breakfast of Champions to immerse yourself, to be with Kilgore in his miserable apartment and his parrot. You're outside of it, seeing everything as if you're watching a docudrama. Ideas are bared out, chewed and explained, but just like a TV docudrama, sometimes it just offers you enough food for thought to imagine yourself in that situation alongside the characters. I can't say that this is on purpose or accidental, but it happens. Thus, it's no surprise to say that there is actually a solid cohesion. There is barely a rhythm, going back and forth and giving the illusion that said cohesion is shattered. Like I mentioned before, sadly, sometimes it goes a bit too long with the side threads and it ends a bit boring. As for the themes, for a book that gets back and forth in time, gets lost in tangents, I'm somewhat surprised and unsurprised to see that there are several themes with plot threads and at least 3 different main ideas within this book. It's Kurt Vonnegut, what do you expect? I won't talk about all of them, yes, I suggest you read this book, but there is the exposition of several facets of our lives that are absurd whenever you strip them to their bare bones. Racism and homophobia are also recurring themes that show up, alongside an interesting analysis of free will, nihilism, existentialism, and the destructive nature of the capitalism and the idiocy of the populace, the simplistic nature of people, and so on. Everything is slowly being destroyed. People on Doodley Squat, yet they yearn for simple happiness and meaning. There is a lot of discussion about meaning. Meaning of life, meaning of words, meaning behind actions. There is also an interesting overarching theme, but that goes for spoilers. But, unlike the general descriptions of concepts, these themes are actually handled with varying qualities and levels of depth, subtlety, and complexity, depending on how immediate and real the themes are. So, whenever the book is dealing with philosophy or the nature of free will, it will be subtle and go interestingly deep. For example, you won't see people saying "I'm a nihilist", but they discuss their purposes in life and what they can do for things like the environment, or how can they make people's lives better or worse. There's the delightful exploration of communication, values and expectations in Trout's stories, correlating with several of the situations that happens between the character and his life. On the other hand, themes like capitalism, racism, and poverty are handled with the subtlety, depth, and complexity of a brick to the face. A brick is a piece of rock or cooked clay shaped like a cuboid, and a bunch of them are necessary to build a house. But sometimes, due to their sturdiness, a brick is used as a weapon to bash people. A brick looks like this. For the characterization, the characters are surprisingly multifaceted, even if they aren't exactly deep. Kilgore Trout may be a misanthropic, pessimistic loner, but through his stories you see that he is far more perceptive than one would think, and his trip, even before the incident, turns him into a better person as he talks with his peers. Dwayne Hoover, on the other hand, is a homophobic jackass with his son, but before his mind was thrown into disarray and his subsequent spiral into insanity, he was actually kind and beneficial to his peers, and had a good relation with black people even in the middle of a racist town. Characters are neither completely good or completely bad, completely dumb or completely smart, which does provide a compelling narrative. For the final thoughts, in the end, I'd say that this was a quirky and interesting ride. The snippets did catch my attention and the style did clearly give its statements alongside the themes, even if it sometimes took me a while to trudge through the longest and the derivative spots. This is one of those books where it's hard to point out a specific crowd for. It's an introspective voyage through our weird lives, delivered in a weird way. I can only say that if you're looking for Kurt Vonnegut stuff, read it. As for the spoilers, there's an interesting exploration on the concepts of free will with a recurring point about one of Kilgore's stories, where God only made one person to have complete free will. Said story talks about how only one person was really flexible in their path and could choose what to do. And this is the story that makes Dwayne crack, believing he is the only person with free will, while everyone else are robots unable to diverge from their programming. But at the same time, it's downright sad that this person with free will is Kilgore, but at the same time isn't. Things are forced by the author, but at the same time can't be completely directed, as if God couldn't play with his creations akin to Lego pieces. Everyone has a modicum of free will, even if it was tweaked, while some people have more free will than others. We are all slaves of our brain chemicals after all. And basically, the longer the plot goes, the less of a person Dwayne becomes, and more Kilgore turns into an image of Kurt himself, but also his father. Through both characters, Kurt starts to give an interesting exposition about himself, his ideas, his thoughts about his family and friends, blurring the line between reality and fiction, at least in this case. And lastly, for all the talk of Dwayne going on a rampage, said rampage turns out to be just him hurting some people, not even killing anyone. And it's sad that the first thing in my mind was, wow, nowadays this wouldn't even get to the bottom rung of the local news. That's all for today, thank you very much and see you all next time. Remember to like and subscribe.